All right. Good evening, everyone. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'll have to grab one more book. Right back.
How many people watch this usually? Like
Tonight?
Like
it was 12.
12 people, wow.
Now they stand called the national.
From all over the entire world.
What did you you don't want?
Yeah. I put you back on 2 or 9. Why don't you?
Can they participate? Like they,
Yeah, they could have been asked. Yeah, for sure. And so they're someone
every other speak up.
All right, so hi everyone. Today is a very special day. All right.
Amen.
Today is the birthday of two of not only the greatest tzaddikim, most righteous people in recent history. I say recent of the last 300-400 years, but two of the most influential leaders of the last half a millennium. So the first is today is the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Chassidic movement, and that happened in the year 1698. And 47 years later, that same day, the 18th of Elul, is the birthday of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur of Liadi, who's the founder of the Chabad Chassidic movement. He's the author of the Tanya, named after him. So, and if you think about the influence of Hasidism and the influence of Chabad Hasidism on the Jewish world, you really cannot overstate the significance of it. Even firstly, the Hasidic world is enormous, right? We have within different groups of Hasidic Jews, but really all of Judaism has been influenced by the mystical and the Hasidic teachings, even those who don't consider themselves to be Hasidim, but it has really penetrated all areas of Jewish life. The essential messages of Hasidic teachings, such as joy and music and humility, and these are all areas where the Baal Shem Tov really emphasized and really shaped and continues to shape Judaism today. So, and then the Alter Rebbe was the founder of the Chabad Chassidic philosophy. So within Hasidism, you have different branches, and Chabad Hasidism was founded by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur of Liadi. And what's unique about Chabad Hasidic teaching is that it takes the principles of Chassidus and says that one has to invest themselves intellectually to understand it. And that's what Chabad actually stands for. Chabad is an acronym of 3 words: Chachma, Bina, Da'as, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And to take the ideas that the Baal Shem Tov brought and spoke about and actually study it in depth. One of the very unique differences as an illustration of this. In a Chabad yeshiva, they'll spend, in addition to the 6 or 7 hours a day of studying Talmud, there will be a couple hours of study of Chassidic teaching. You don't come across that in other Chassidic movements, that you have studying Chassidic teaching and mysticism for several hours a day. That is uniquely Chabad. And again, it connects to the actual name Chabad. So we'll start with the L'chaim, and then we'll explain how we're going to hopefully connect today's Talmud with a little bit of a Chassidic flavor. Plenty more. 47%. Reason 47% is because the Alter Rebbe was born on the Baal Shem Tov's 47th birthday. So it all connects, right? All right. So I want to an interesting analogy to explain what Hasidism brought to the world, right? We have Torah, we have Talmud, we have Jewish law. It's always been there. Hasidic teaching didn't bring any new mitzvahs. There's no new commandments. no new rabbinic ideas. It's the same Torah. The same Torah. So what exactly, how did Hasidism change things? So there's different answers given to that, different ways to explain it, different analogies given. But one analogy I once heard from a rabbi, wonderful rabbi, his name is Rabbi Shlomo Yaki, and he gave the following parable. He said when he was a child growing up in England, he said he remembers when there was this brand new invention called the television, except that in England they didn't call it television, they called it the tube, apparently. So he said there was this new exciting invention, and there was one Jew in town who was, I guess, wealthy or a macher, and he got a television, and he invited all of the community to come and look at this fancy new invention. And he says, he was a young boy at the time, 7 or 8 years old, and he went along this exciting trip. And he came and he started watching. They turned it on, it was black and white. And it so happened that what was on the screen was a symphony. Problem was, the sound wasn't working. So he was watching as a child and he didn't get it because what he saw the video was focused on was some guy with a stick just waving wildly. And that's what he saw, a guy with a stick waving his hands, looked like a total lunatic. Guy just waving his hands. Again, the sound wasn't working, Sufism. And he was watching him in his 8-year-old mind, he was looking at him and showing him as a crazy person. But then he said somebody noticed, somebody realized there's something wrong with it, there's got to be sound. And he went to the back of the machine, of the television, moving around the wires, and suddenly the sound started working. And now he looked back at the screen, and suddenly it was the same screen, the same image in front of him, but suddenly it made sense. Suddenly the person who was waving the baton wasn't just waving wildly, but actually every act that he was doing was helping to time the music and directing everyone to play the right music. So he said it was the same exact image in front of him. But when you turn down the sound, suddenly it was so much more logical. It made sense. It all fit. And he gave this analogy to explain that when the Baal Shem Tov and then follow the Alter Rebbe came, they weren't coming to add to Torah. They weren't coming to add to any element of the picture that's in front of us, to add to the reality, but rather it was about turning on the sound to allow us to appreciate that which we've seen all along. Suddenly the mitzvah which we've been doing all our lives, whether it was Shabbos or kosher or prayer, suddenly there was music to it. Suddenly it made sense. So that's what Chassidus came to do. Chassidus came not to add anything new to Judaism, but to give new life to what already was, to the Judaism which already existed. And the Baal Shem Tov came at a particularly tough time for the Jewish people. It's right after the terrible tragedy of the Kazakhs and Khmelnytsky and and they came after the physical destruction that the Ukrainian Kazakhs caused on Polish Jewry, and after the false Mashiach of Shabtai Tzvi, where hundreds of thousands of Jews placed their trust in someone who claimed that he was going to bring salvation to the Jewish people, and he turned out to be a fraud, which was it was like a double punch the Jewish people had to endure. And it's at this moment where the people were really downtrodden, where you have this new light brought to the world. Again, not to change any element of Judaism, not to add or subtract from Judaism, but simply to bring new life into Judaism. And therefore it's appropriate that the day of the birth of the Baal Shem Tov, as well as the day of the birth of the Alter Rebbe, is what? Chai Elul, 18th of Elul, which also is 18 is Chai, which means life. They were born on the day which means Chai, which means life, because they were there to bring new life in Judaism. And Judaism is not just meant to be practiced and observed, it's meant to be observed with excitement and with joy and with energy. And that is what Chassidus is meant to do, is to add a deeper appreciation for that which we've always been doing, but now you appreciate it a little bit further. So for that reason, what I want to do today in our Talmud discussion is to share a basic area of Talmud, perhaps even one of the more famous areas of Talmud. But then after we finish studying it on its basic level, its basic meaning and understanding, we'll share a more mystical, deeper Chassidic understanding of the same Talmud. So that the very same section, which is very legal, and you could almost argue legal and somewhat dry, take the same section of study and understand it on a deeper level, on a more mystical level as well. So there's still several more Gemaras. You're welcome to pass it around. And we're going to be studying the tractate of Baba Metzia, 93a, which talks about the different types of guardians. The different types of guardians, it's a very practical, pragmatic, legal text. And our responsibility. So someone lends you a car and something happens. What level of responsibility do you have for that which happens to your car? If you ask, what if someone gives you their car to watch and says, can you watch this car for a while? And then something happens to the car. To what level are you responsible for damage done to the car?
You getting money for?
Oh, so this is the question. This is what we're going to get into over here. You say a guy walks into a bank and he says, I need a $15,000 loan. They say $15,000 loan. We don't just give out loans. He says, what if I give you a collateral? They say, if you give us a collateral, fine. So he says, here, he comes back a few hours later and he has with him a, I don't know, what is a car that's worth $200,000? A Lamborghini. He comes back with a Lamborghini that's worth $200,000. He says, here's this collateral. Can I borrow $15,000 for 2 weeks? He says, yeah, sure, no problem. This car's worth $200,000. So he said, it's fine. So they take the Lamborghini, they put it aside, give him the money. 2 weeks later, he comes back and he says, here's $15,000. Can I have my car back? They say, certainly. They said, but something doesn't add up over here. You know, we checked your account. You have plenty of money. You've got plenty of wealth. Why is it that you needed $15,000 and you gave us as collateral? And he said, this is the only way I knew that I could securely park my Lamborghini for 2 weeks. I knew it would be taken care of. So, all right. So this is the question. You're guarding something, and there's all sorts of possibilities. And when you are, the common denominator here is that you are in the possession of someone else's item and something happens. You're in the possession of someone else's item and something happens. Says the Mishnah. Mishnah, the bottom is actually 2 Mishnahs on this page. So we are the second Mishnah in the art scroll. It's on page 93a4. Mishnah says like this: Arba'a Shomrim Hain. There are 4 types of custodians. There are 4 situations in which I am a custodian of someone else's object. What are the 4 possibilities? All right, before you look in, anybody want to share what the 4 possibilities are? What are 4 scenarios in which you're watching someone else's item?
You do it for free.
All right, you do it for free. Someone says, can you watch this while I'm gone? Just do me a favor and watch it. That's 1.
You get paid.
Okay, he says, you watch it, but I'll pay you, I'm paying you, I don't know, $20 a day to watch my item. What other possibilities? Yes?
You rent it?
You're renting it. And now it's a little bit different. So now I am renting the item to use, and I'm paying the owner $20 a day. What could be the 4th scenario? Yeah.
It passed away and it was in the will and you got it.
Okay, but then you're not the custodian, then it's yours. The idea is that then it actually belongs to you.
Yeah.
We're talking about 4 scenarios in which you're a custodian, that it's the other person's item. So we shared 3. A watchman, a paid watchman, a watchman at no charge, rental, yes?
Pawning it?
But again, when you pawn something, once it's in your possession, you're the owner, aren't you?
Yeah, I
If they don't
Buying it, you're the owner. Again, that is, you're not the owner, it's someone else's item.
buy it with conditions, right? Still mine.
You're buying, again, it's mine, buying with condition, it's still mine. What could be the 4th scenario in which it's not mine? It's in my possession, but it belongs to you. Paid watchman, unpaid watchman, rental, and borrowing. I borrow it, as I said, can I use it? And that it's yours, I'm just borrowing it to use it. These are the 4 scenarios, and let's see how the Mishnah spells it out. And what are the laws with regards to these four scenarios? And as you can imagine, there are four different levels of responsibility. A watchman at no charge, a paid watchman, a borrower, and a renter. Four different scenarios. The common denominator is that I am in possession of something that belongs to someone else. What does the Mishnah have to say? So, says the Mishnah, Arba, Shomrim Hein, there are four types of guardians. Shomer China, someone who's guarding, someone who is there a better word for someone who's guarding an object? Protecting someone else's item, a guardian, custodian, how do you translate it here? An unpaid custodian is a Shomer China. The Hashoel is the borrower. Nosei Sachar is the one who is a paid watchman. The Hasocher and the renter. So off the top, without thinking further, who has the greatest degree of responsibility of the four? Who should have the greatest degree of responsibility for the item? What?
The one who gets paid.
Okay, the one who's getting paid, the guardian that's getting paid,
The borrower.
the borrower, okay. All right, who should have the least level of responsibility?
The renter.
The renter,
The one who do it for free.
the one who's watching for free. Okay, so we're hearing, let's see what the Mishnah says. Here we go. Shomer Chinam. So it tells us the custodian, the unpaid custodian, Nishpa al Hakol. What that means is swears with regards to everything. In other words, this is actually the most lenient. The unpaid custodian, whatever happens to the item, he doesn't have to pay for it. All he has to do is take an oath that I didn't steal it. So the owner comes in all these situations, the owner comes, let's say it's an animal. That's the most typical example given in the Talmud. I gave you an animal. Again, that could be to watch as a paid custodian, to watch as an unpaid custodian. You borrowed it or you rented it. All could happen with this animal. And the owner comes after the agreed amount of time was a month. The owner comes and says, "Where's my animal?" And the response is, "It's gone." Now it's gone. So the unpaid custodian is always off the hook. All he has to do, the unpaid custodian, again, I gave you something. I said, "Can you do me?" Literally, I said, "Can you do me a favor and watch my horse?" And the unpaid custodian says, "Fine, I'll do you a favor. I'm doing you a favor. No problem." So then he says, "I'm doing you a favor." So then at the end of the month, he comes and he says, "The person says it's gone. I didn't steal it." So the only thing we require the unpaid custodian to do is we want you to take an oath you didn't steal. That's all. Take a shua, and then you are good to go. So that is the least level of responsibility, is the unpaid custodian.
He doesn't have to swear that he did his best to actually guard.
So there's that, yes, that I did. Okay, so we can get into that. He has to swear, let's see, that I didn't steal it and that I wasn't completely irresponsible. Even an unpaid custodian, if I give you my horse and I say, "Can you watch?" and you say yes. So yeah, you're doing me a favor over here. I get it. But nevertheless, if you just leave it out, that's almost like considered actively stealing because you did something completely irresponsible. So he has to say, "I wasn't completely irresponsible. I didn't steal it myself," and that's it. And then he's off the hook. That's the law for the unpaid custodian. Okay?
Would that go for damages or not?
What's that?
Same would go for damages?
Same thing. As long as he wasn't completely negligent, then that's fine. What does it say over here? The unpaid custodian swears with regards to everything, with regards to all the mishaps stated in the relevant passages. This is straight from the Torah, by the way. Thus, the conclusion of this means the unpaid shomer, the unpaid custodian, as many of you know, one of our beloved members of our community, the last name is Shomer. That's what we're talking about. A shomer is a guardian. So we're talking about four different types of shomers. So it's a shame he's not here. So the shomer is someone who says, in other words, thus the unpaid shomer does not pay for theft, loss, natural death, or breakage. But he does pay for damage or loss, which are due to his own negligence. So anything which is negligent, knows I was completely irresponsible, and everyone is, even though you're doing me a favor, but that's not a favor if you're negligent. But anything beyond that, loss or theft, or then they don't pay tremendous. Okay, that is the least level of responsibility. Let's move on to the Mishnah now goes to the other extreme. Who has the highest level of responsibility? Hashoah, the borrower. If you borrow something, he says, this is the Mishnah Mishalem es hakol. You pay for everything. Doesn't matter if it was stolen, doesn't matter if you were responsible. If you borrow something, then you take full responsibility for what happens. You're borrowing it, which means, let's remember, when you're watching something of mine, you're doing me a favor. When I lend you something, I'm doing you a favor. I'm not charging you. I'm saying, here, you want to use my horse? Here's the horse. Go ahead and use it. But you are now the beneficiary of my kindness. It's the exact opposite of the shomer. So now you're responsible for everything. You pay for everything. The borrower pays for everything. In other words, theft, loss, or even unavoidable mishap. What if it's struck by lightning? What if the item is struck by lightning? You could say the borrower did nothing wrong. There was nothing he could have done differently. Nevertheless, if you're a borrower, you are responsible, 100%. There is one exception, which we're not going to get to here, which is if I borrowed it to do a certain type of work and it died, the animal died doing that work, so then I'm not responsible. That's the one exception. I don't want to get into that too much, but that's the one exception for a borrower, is that if it died, the animal died doing the work that I borrowed it to do, so then I'm not responsible.
Would that be the most? Would be the most responsible?
No, because it's almost like I borrowed it for this purpose.
Right.
And you, by borrowing it for this purpose, the owner is acknowledging that the animal could do this. So if it dies doing that very thing, if it dies mesa machmas, in the Talmud terminology, it's called mesa machmas malacha. It dies from the very work I borrowed it to do. So then this is our agreement. Our agreement is that this can happen. That when I say I'd like to borrow your horse to ride it for a mile, and it dies from after a half a mile because it couldn't. So then you basically acknowledge that it could ride for a mile. So again, so that's in the separate section. It does discuss it, but that's the one time the borrower doesn't have to pay. But even otherwise, again, even struck by lightning, which is the ultimate, what's called onus. Onus is there's nothing I could have done different. Onus literally means force. That the situation was forced upon me. I didn't do anything wrong. The borrower has to pay. So now we have the two extremes. We have the shomer chinam, the guardian at no charge who's never responsible unless it was absolute negligence. And we have the borrower who's always responsible, unless, as we said, the exception if it dies in the line of work which you borrowed. But we're left with two guys in the middle. Who's that? Turns out, as the Mishnah says, these two middle watchmen, custodians, the same law, they carry the same level of responsibility, which is what? No se sachar vehasocher, the guardian, the watchman who is being paid, the shomer who's being paid, that's called a shomer sachar. So again, I give you the horse and I say, could you watch my horse? And then, and you say, that's what happens here, right? People have their dog and they want to leave town, so they send them to they'll send the dog to a pet hotel. First world issues. If you were to tell someone 100 years ago, 200 years ago, I send my dog to a dog hotel, their eyes would pop out. So yeah, you send it to a pet hotel. What are you saying? I'm paying you to watch my animal. Okay, so that's not that. So that person, as well as hasocher, someone who rents an item. Now, someone who rents an item, so you say, you want my horse? I'll give it to you. It costs $25 a day, a rental. Now think about it for a moment. What's the common denominator between these two? Is money, but more than just money, is that no one's doing anybody any favors. It's called zenen and v'zenen. Each side is benefiting. In the previous example, one side is benefiting and one side is doing an act of kindness, right? When someone borrows something, the giver is kind, the borrower is benefiting. When someone's watching something at no charge, the giver is benefiting and the watchman is doing an act of kindness. In this situation, whether it's a paid watchman or a renter, both sides benefit. You're benefiting the object and I'm being paid. That's so in both situations, both sides are benefiting. And therefore there is a medium level of responsibility. What is the medium level of responsibility? So in those situations, nishva'im al hashvura al hashvuya the al hamesa. In those situations, they swear. When we say they swear, in other words, they're off the hook. The term is they swear. It means that they swear to confirm that the following happened. But really, without to simplify it, they are exempt from responsibility. They are not responsible for a broken limb, or if it was captured by armed robbers, or died of natural causes. Then these two people, the renter or the paid custodian, is not responsible. However, they do pay for, or they are responsible, umishalmin es ha'aveda ve'es ha'gnei. But they do have to pay for loss if the item got lost, if the animal ran away, or theft. So now, here we have an interesting separation between forms of injury which the typical person can't be held responsible for, and forms of loss which we say you are responsible. What is the difference? Let's see it over here. The example is given here. You're not responsible for the item broke a limb, captured by armed brigands, or died of natural causes, as he says in the footnotes. In other words, in the event the item is lost or damaged through one of these unavoidable mishaps. That's the key word over here. It's unavoidable. These items, the fact that the animal is walking and breaks a limb, it's unavoidable. There's nothing I could have done differently. The same is with an armed robber who comes and takes it. So in those situations, even the paid, if I rent a vehicle and something happens, let's think about car rentals. I rent a car. What am I responsible? What am I not responsible? So I'm responsible for something which was, if it's unavoidable, then I'm not responsible. Okay. If it's unavoidable, I'm not responsible. But if it's avoidable, and what is an example of an avoidable problem is theft. Theft is different than armed robbery. Armed robbery means someone comes with a gun and says, you got to give this to me. Okay, then there's nothing I could have done differently. Theft means someone came into my house in the middle of the night and took it. That's where I say, well, you should have been more responsible. You should have a better lock system on here. Yeah.
What about negligence that leads to a broken limb?
So what do you mean by that? That's a great point. But and how so?
The animal is walking, the guy's looking at his phone, the animal walks into a pit.
That's a great example. The Talmud goes through all these examples. So that's where the Talmud gets into. We have to determine if it was negligence. In other words, and you're going to see, we're going to get to a little bit of the Gemara over here, which talks almost like, gives some interesting examples of it. But what is considered to be negligence? And this is why you go to court, right? This is why, even though we're spelling out simple rules, but you can see how there's so many cases that can come up where we can have major disagreement as to whether this is negligence. Again, the shomer chinam, the unpaid entity, and the shoel is pretty clear. Although even the shomer chinam has to pay for actual negligence. Again, when it comes to negligence, everyone's responsible, even the shomer chinam. The issue is there's really 4 levels, or is it 3 levels? There's 3, maybe 4. There's 3. One level is negligence. Negligence means I was completely irresponsible. Level 2 is I wasn't negligent, but I could have done things better. Someone came into my house and stole it. Maybe instead of a single lock, I could have put a double lock or whatever. I should have paid more attention. That's not called negligence, but it is avoidable. The 3rd level is unavoidable. These are 3 different levels. Now, what fits into which category? You can go, that's where you go to court to determine, is this negligence? Is this avoidable loss or unavoidable loss? The shomer chinam only pays for negligence. The 2 middle people, the renter and the wash pavement, they pay for negligence and for an avoidable loss. The shoel even pays for unavoidable loss. Yes.
Wouldn't we be able to make like a general rule that says any time that you were negligent, that like some sort of damage was caused by your purposeful negligence, or not even intentional, but like they were negligent, they could have prevented something from happening, then in these 2 cases, then they would be responsible.
Say it again.
Like the general rule would be that anytime they do something that causes some sort of damage, and it's because of their negligence, because they weren't responsible enough. And in these 2 cases, can't we say that
And now in these two cases, if someone is negligent, which is called pshia, the Hebrew word is poshea. So that's really like, and if we want to back it up a little bit, there's like one is direct damage. If you were to cause damage, then there's negligence, that's the worst. Right? Everyone agrees when you cause damage, you're responsible. Negligence is just beneath that. Negligence means that you were completely irresponsible. You went into the house, you left the animal outside. The animal ran away. Of course it ran away. You didn't tie it down and it ran away. That's negligence. Even the unpaid watchman thing. But then there's that next level, which is perhaps the most difficult to determine, which is not negligence, but not unavoidable. And I think in life you can imagine such scenarios. It's not negligence. I wasn't negligent, but this is an issue which could have been avoided if I was more responsible. And that the renter and the paid watchman has to.
Have they practiced in Shneur's law? The Shneur's practices than that?
It's very interesting, the idea of insurance, because that's the next question, which is when does insurance have to step up? If I'm completely negligent.
To release the borrower.
Right. So this we're not even getting into insurance. Not even getting into insurance. Yeah, all right. Are we good? Okay. So these are the four different categories, the four shomrim. So this we've already learned a very essential area of Jewish law, which is the level of responsibility of four different custodians. Again, the unpaid watchman, the paid watchman, the borrower, and the renter. I'm going to skip the opening section of the Talmud because it's a little bit technical. But the first portion of the Talmud says is that I'm going to jump to the Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, which is about 3 lines from the bottom of the page. And he basically says that even though there may be 4 custodians, but how many rules are there? In other words, how many sets? How many? The word is rules, but there's how many degrees of responsibility are there? There's really only 3. You have 4 custodians. There's 4 different types of custodians, but 2 of them have the same exact laws. Right, as we pointed out, you have the borrower and the most responsible, the unpaid custodian is least responsible, and then the 2 in the middle, the shomer sachar, the paid guardian, and the renter, they have the same exact level of responsibility. So the Talmud says there's really 3 levels of responsibility, even though there's 4 different scenarios of custodianship. There's really only 3 levels of responsibility. Is that clear? Yeah. Now the Gemara. So what was raised before was based on the question of how do we determine level of responsibility. So let me go to the bottom of the page where we get actual. It's interesting because the Talmud gives actual examples and raises the question of what the halacha is. The Gemara says like this: Hahu raya. Raya is a shepherd. So a shepherd is the perfect example of what? Which of the 4? A paid custodian. The shepherd, you give the animals to the shepherd, you say, can you watch this? And I'll pay you whatever the rate is. You pay the shepherd for their to watch the animals. So the story happened like this. Ahuraya, there was a shepherd.
Could you not be a renter?
What's that?
Could you not be a renter?
By definition, I don't think shepherds were rented. They weren't renting the animals.
Well, if they want to sell the shear, the coat, and they want to sell it, but the animals is belong to them.
And that could be a scenario, but I think the simple definition of a shepherd was someone who was just watching the sheep for someone else. I think that was the assumption.
You could do it for free.
Could,
Yeah, cool.
but eventually he was paid for his work. The Gemara gets into this. It gets into Yah. So the Gemara says, so there was a shepherd. He was watching the animals along the river of Nahar Papa. The name of the name was the Papa River. Sharik Chadaminayu. And one of the animals slipped, the Nafla Lamaya, and fell into the water and drowned. So an animal he was caring for the animals along the riverbank. One of the animals slipped, fell into the water. What level of responsibility is here? So obviously you can imagine the owner said, you owe me a sheep. The shepherd said, no, I don't. I did exactly what was typically done. Also, the Rabbi, he came in front of the leading authority judge at the time, whose name was Rabbi, Upatre, and he said he says, you're not responsible. You're off the hook. You don't have to pay for this animal. Omar, he said, my Havale. He says, what could he have done differently? It was a normal thing to do. As he says, it goes on to say, Hanater kidinatre inshe. And this is the key law. He says he was guarding the animals as it was customarily done. And therefore, from here, we derive a very important ruling. As he says over here, footnote number 2, which Rashi says, this is not called a lost item for which a paid watchman is responsible, but rather this is called an unavoidable mishap, which seems to be strange. Why is it unavoidable? It seems to be very avoidable. You didn't have to bring the animals here. You could have brought the animals somewhere else. Yeah?
So all these snares are pay or no pay?
Right now we're talking about paid. When the Talmud brings up a scenario of a shepherd, the assumption is a paid watchman.
No, I'm saying like, if they're irresponsible, you have to pay.
He
for
does
it,
not have to pay.
or they-
No, so the
either
Rabbi
have to
ruled,
pay for it, they don't.
Rabbi ruled the shepherd does not have to pay for the drowned sheep.
All right.
Yep.
But then is there ever a scenario where they pay partial?
No. Not in these circumstances. You're either responsible or not responsible. It's a great point, but no, this would be yes or no. And if it's you may say, what if it's questionable? What if it's uncertain whether he's responsible or not? So maybe you should pay half. Here, then another law kicks in, which is in a situation of uncertainty. The one who's trying to take money, one who's trying to collect, has to bring proof. So even if the basin says we don't know for sure what the ruling would be over here, the result would not be a 50% payment. The result would be, because we don't know, then the only way you have to pay, the only way he's going to pay is if the one who's trying to collect will prove it. That's the general rule in Jewish legalities, is that the only way to collect, if there's a situation of uncertainty, we don't say pay half, we say the one who's trying to collect has to now prove their side. So then to this situation, the drowned animal then is not akin to a lost animal, but rather considered an animal that has died as a result of an unavoidable mishap. Which means that the definition of unavoidable mishap has now changed. You would think, again, it would seem to be a clearly avoidable issue. He could have not brought it by the riverbank. But if the guardian or the shepherd is doing that which is normally done, then any damage which happens as the result of that which is normally done is considered to be unavoidable damage. Because we cannot expect a watchman, if I give someone an item to watch, and even though I pay them for it, or for that matter, the other scenario where I rent an item from someone and I'm paying for my rental, I cannot be, again, think about a car rental. I cannot be anything, if I cannot be expected to do anything different than the norm. And if the damage happens as a result of what I did, but what I did was what is normally done, then I cannot be held responsible. That's called unavoidable. Even though technically it's avoidable, that's considered to be unavoidable. Yes.
How come we can't apply this principle to the other cases? It's the same idea.
But in what way?
Like that unavoidable, and you're doing what's customarily done. Like you're borrowing an animal to use it. And
The
you're
borrower
saying-
has to pay for unavoidable issues. Doesn't matter. The borrower has a different category.
How come we can't apply the same principle? It's the same idea.
Because
Level of ownership.
because the borrower is really saying, did you just say the borrower is a type of ownership?
I'm saying that he's, the person giving the borrower the item is doing him a favor, so therefore.
Yes, so he's doing a favor more so, it's almost as if, this is where it gets, is that the borrower says, I take full responsibility regardless what happens. Again, even if it's struck by lightning, entirely unavoidable, because I am the borrower, I take upon myself to return this item, come what may. I will return this item. A borrower has that level of responsibility. Your question is a good question as to why we create that level, but on a simple level, the borrower has, out of the kindness of the giver, because the borrower is saying, you're doing me a kindness and giving this to me. My response to that is that I will get this back to you. Come what may, I'm going to get this back to you. What's that? Right. This is a high risk factor. You know that it's almost like when you're paying for something, you're paying for the lower risk value. So so therefore, but here we learn that unavoidable, yes.
Is there circumstances in these cases where you could have the terms waived, like in front of two Jewish witnesses, for example?
Yeah, you don't even have to have that. There is, whenever it comes to these areas of law, when it comes to legal issues, unlike what's the word I'm looking for? Unlike other areas of Judaism, which are
Drive,
no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's legal matters, and then there's
social matters?
spiritual matters. Ritual. Ritual issues, you can't make any conditions. Like, I can't go to my rabbi and say, my team is in the World Series this Shabbos. Can I move Shabbos to Tuesday this week? That doesn't work. So in ritual issues, you can't make any conditions to move things around. But in legal matters, you can. In matters which are between a buyer and a seller, between two partners, whatever we agree to is considered to be binding. So you can do that. So in these situations, if I borrow something and I say to the lender, you're doing this, and technically I'd be responsible even for lightning struck, but let's agree that I'm not responsible for that level, and he agrees, and we both agree, then yes, then there's
witnesses. You should.
probably, the question is, you certainly need something, maybe a contract with a signed contract may be sufficient, maybe witnesses.
Yeah, for example, let's say the shepherd was schlepping in a path,
Right,
like very narrow path. There's a
Right, so
great
if this was-
probability,
if it was agreed to beforehand, absolutely. Anyway, let's go back to this. So that was one example we gave. And now we're going to see it taken even further. Omar le Abaye. So then Abaye heard Rabbah say this, and he said, and he says to him, what about, you think so? You think that this shepherd is not responsible? Let me give you another scenario. Omar le Abaye, let me ata. He says, what if I brought the animal to, what if the shepherd entered the town, that the custom of the town was, people were typically, there was a time in which they would leave the animals outside for a moment and go into town, leaving the animals out there. That was what typically done. Then too, he would be absolved for any responsibility because he's just following the custom of the town. And he says to him, yes. He says that too, the shepherd would be off the hook because he's following the common practice of the people.
Of that town.
Even
though he doesn't come from a place.
That's interesting. He doesn't seem to get into whether he's from that town or not, but the point is that you follow the customs of the town. Think it's another example. Says Abaye, ask further. He says, Gana purta be'ina the gonarinshi. What if the shepherd took a nap? Took a nap? But he took a nap at the time, or the amount of time, which shepherds typically do in that place, and something happens. Is he also exempt? And he answered yes. So he says, now, we have to see the Gemara in Halacha, if this is actually accepted as the Halacha. I'm not sure it is, but Rabbah is certainly of the opinion. In fact, I suspect that this is not actually the, even though this is the ruling of Rabbah at the time, I'm pretty sure that that is not the actual ruling in Halacha.
Makes sense.
It makes sense that what?
Because if I borrow your car, I pay for your car, I can go sleep, I can park my car outside. I have to be next to the car the entire time? No, I can park my car in the parking lot when I go into a hotel and take it.
It's a little bit different than having the sheep roaming while you're taking a nap. It's a little bit different. The car is parked, it's actually pretty secure. Now, this would almost be the equivalent of leaving the keys in the ignition and going inside. That's the difference over here. So Rabbah has a lenient approach. He said, if this is what people do, then you are not responsible. But I actually believe, as the Gemara continues, we have to stop here because I want to move on to a Chassidic approach to this whole topic. But I actually feel halachically, in fact, if you give me just a second, let's pull this up. Rambam Hilchos Stiros. Pull this up without taking up too much time. Actually. What is the ruling? Do we follow Rabbi's opinion, who's pretty lenient?
Yeah.
So here it says like this. Halacha from the Rambam. In the case where a shepherd left his flock unattended and went to town, whether or not he did this is from Maimonides, who actually issues this halacha. Whether or not he did so at a time when shepherds usually enter the town, if a wolf or a lion killed one of the animals, he could have rescued it with the help of other shepherds. He is liable. The Rabbi and the Tort maintain okay, it seems, and we'd have to go a little bit further, continue the Talmud, but it seems that even though Rabbi is pretty strong in his opinion, that the shepherd, as long as he was doing what other people typically did, he is absolved, because again, he's a paid custodian. It seems like the halacha does not follow that. The halacha follows that if the action was very clearly avoidable, if what happened was very clearly avoidable, even if this was done and others did it. I mean, think about it in terms of like if you rent a car. What if you rent a car and then you were speeding? And everyone is speeding. But something happens because you were speeding. Can you say that I did what everyone else did? And I did what was, not only what everyone else did, this is kind of expected. Or not, or should the person say, it doesn't matter that other people did this, this was something which is very clearly avoidable. So Rabbi's of the opinion, as long as that's what everyone's doing, that's the level of responsibility, then you're not responsible if you were doing what everyone else is doing. But halacha, Abaye, who questions and it continues to question, we only point to several questions, felt otherwise. And it seems like the halacha, those who bring down what is ultimately Jewish law, is that in these situations where the shepherd took a nap, something happened to the sheep, he would be responsible because it is totally legitimate for the owner to say, it doesn't matter that others were taking naps. I expected you not to nap when you were watching my sheep. So that is how, I believe that's how the halacha rules, not in accordance with Rabbi's opinion. Just to conclude, all this we shared is halacha, very basic law, important Jewish law. By the way, this is law till today. You know, till today, if a scenario where I gave you something to watch, or I paid you to watch something, then if you were to show up to a basement, today often people run straight to the secular courts, but you can't go to a basement. Two Jews say, we don't want to go to secular court. I'd rather bring this to the attention of a Jewish court and have this ruled Jewishly, and we both agree to it, then they would rule based on whatever this Gemara says. This is not a, some sort of abstract topic, practical topic. However, there's also the Rabbi brings out, as you mentioned, today is the birthday of the Chassidic, the great luminaries of Chassidic. What could possibly be a Chassidic view on this legal text? Rabbi points out, this is based on the teachings of the Shalah, also a mystical commentary, who says that these same four ideas, we can look at life itself with the same four lenses. In other words, God gave us our lives. How do we see that which we have? God gave us a body, a life, health. What are we when it comes to the body that God gave us? God gave it to us. It's not ours, right? There's certain mitzvahs which are connected to that, right? Like for example, a mitzvah which is commonly known is that according to Torah, a Jew should not get a tattoo. Why not? So the reason is, one of the reasons given is because the body's not yours. It's not yours. You are in possession of a body that belongs to God. It's crazy to think, but that with the body that we are using, walking, it actually doesn't belong to us.
Same rule in the army.
Then in the army, what?
The army, you cannot even inherit yourself
Why?
because it's not your body.
Interesting.
It belongs to the army because you cannot inherit yourself. That's
But it's a different question because the army's not claiming to own it, are they?
yeah, it's there. You are there.
Really? Okay. So now that we know that the body is not ours, so now what are we? Are we a unpaid watchman? Are we a paid watchman? Are we a borrower? Or are we a renter? Borrower. Okay?
Unless you're pretty young, the army subletting you, right?
So, as it turns out, you are whatever you want to be. In other words, you can have any one of these four perspectives and how you see yourself in the control of the body that God gave. The highest level of seeing life, of seeing the neshama that God gave me. And by the way, even the beginning of creation, the idea we call a shomer, the idea of creation, we're gonna celebrate Rosh Hashanah in a week and a half. And what do we say? That God placed Adam in Gan Eden, la'avda, to work the land, u'lashamra, and to guard it. So we've come across a term that God says, you are a guardian of the world, a guardian of your body. So how do I see myself? So the highest level, that the loftiest level that one can see themselves is a shomer chinam. A shomer chinam, which means I am an unpaid, the highest level is an unpaid watchman. God gave me this body and this soul to guard. I guard it by preserving it through the observance of Torah mitzvahs. And I'm not expecting any payment for it. I'm not expecting payment for my life. I don't serve God. I don't watch. When it comes to watching our body and soul, you watch it by the observance of Torah mitzvahs. You watch it by taking care of it spiritually. And I do that just because God asked me to. Just like unpaid watchman says, you want me to watch your object? No problem, I'll do it. And I'm not expecting anything in return. The highest level of serving God is when I say, God, I'll watch the life that you gave me. I'll make sure it stays pristine and holy. And I'm not doing it because I expect anything in return. I don't expect you to pay me for it. I'm just doing it because you gave me the honor of watching the life that you instilled within. That's the highest level.
But didn't we say that in this case, the one who's doing the favor is the one who's actually guarding? So it's like,
No, I'm doing a favor to God. Yes.
Right.
No, I'm saying to God, I don't want anything back. You gave me, I'm doing you a favor. You asked me to take care of my neshama, my body. I'm happy to protect it, to guard it, to protect it against negative influences of all the world. I am a shomer chinam. That's, again, we're talking at a spiritual level, but I'm not doing this because I expect payment. That's the highest way one can serve God. A lesser level of serving God is a shomer safek. You asked me to guard the soul and to protect it and to make sure that my life over here remains holy. Remember, the neshama, when I say guard, it's interesting because the soul enters this world pure. And then we have to spend our whole life protecting the purity of our souls. A child is born pure. The neshama is pure. And then we have to guard it. We have to protect it. The Torah mitzvahs allows us to protect the purity, the holiness of the soul. A second level, though, is saying, good, you want me to guard the soul, which means to observe the Torah and the mitzvahs and watch what I eat. All this is part of guarding the soul that you gave me and the body you gave me. Fine, but I'd like to be paid. I'd like to be paid for it. How do we expect God to pay? Well, that could be here in this world. I want payment in this world, that I should have all the blessings that I deserve, or maybe I believe in payment in the world to come. But either way, I expect payment for that, for the guardianship. You put me here. It's not easy. It's not easy to serve God. It's not easy to follow all the rules of Torah. For that, I expect payment. And God says, no problem. God promises payment. You look in the Torah, God says, I'm happy to pay. I'll pay you with blessing. You know, we believe in the idea of consequence and positive consequences that we are paid. By the way, all of this we're not even getting into that when I don't do my job, what level of my responsibility is it? Right? What if I don't guard my neshama? What if I don't take care of my body? So then how responsible I am to God? So the same analogies which we gave in the Mishnah, we could say, well, what happened to me, it was unavoidable. You know, you put in front of me such a test that I couldn't protect my neshama, but it was unavoidable. So then, yes.
Does our neshama also borrowed?
The neshama also is given to us, right? So we're meant to protect it and guard that too, the body and the soul. Then there's the person who says, I am a renter. Now the renter is a little bit different than the one who's being paid to watch. The renter says, I see myself as having been given something that I am meant to enjoy. The renter, unlike the guard, what's the difference between the renter and the guardian? The guardian doesn't is not enjoying the object. He's just protecting the object. The renter says, no, I want to enjoy, I want to use that horse. I don't want to just watch it. I'm going to pay you to let me use that horse. So where does that align itself spiritually? The renter is someone who looks at life and says, I want to enjoy life. I was given life, I want to enjoy it. The only way I can, though, is if I pay. So I have to pay God for the use of life. How do I pay God? All right, by doing Torah, by studying, by fulfilling the laws that God gave me. So it's slightly different than the person who says, it's two different, it's a subtle difference in the last person. The last person says, God, you want me to protect the body and soul you gave me? Fine, but I expect compensation. The renter says, God, I'm here, I want to enjoy my life, I want to live good. The only way to do so is if I pay for that rental. Okay, God, I'll pay you, I'll do whatever you want me to do. The mitzvahs, the obligations you tell me to do are my payment to you in order to be able to enjoy to enjoy life and to have the blessings of life. So it's a slightly different attitude. Yes?
Does enjoyment mean not protecting the soul?
Enjoyment, no, in both cases, you're talking about a person who says, I'm going to do what I have to do. But there's two attitudes. One is saying, I am here to serve, I'm here to protect the soul that God gave me, and I expect God to then reward me for that. The other person says, I'm here to serve myself. The only way I can serve myself, the only way I see life. It's how you see life. So I see life as, it's like actually very deep, very profound. Do you see life as, even as a Jew, as a fully observant Jew, you could say, I see life as self-serving, but I have to pay God for that rental. Or I see life as God-serving, but I expect God to pay me for my efforts. So there's two different attitudes one can have in life, but they're actually very different. They're actually very different, even though it's like we said, the shomer socher and the socher are similar in the sense that both the renter and the paid watchman are similar when it comes to level of responsibility, but it's two different things. One person is watching the other person's item, the other person is using the other person's item. Very different. And you can have that same analogy in when we talk about how we view life and how we view the soul that God gave us. And in the lowest level, which the highest level of responsibility is the borrower, is the one who says, God, I'm just borrowing life from you. I don't expect anything from me back. I'm just, when you borrow something, you don't expect anything back.
Won't the borrower eventually have to pay? Because I'm sure at some point the borrower.
Well, that's the other thing. The borrower is also the highest level of responsibility. To someone who sees life as just, given to me, I don't know anything in return. Well, that person has a very high level of responsibility. So here you see, ultimately we say, just the main thing is to follow, to do Torah mitzvahs, even if for the wrong reasons. Whether you see life as something you have borrowed, which means that I don't owe anything in return, or you see it in one of those two middle paths where you do have to pay, you do have to work towards it. I'm either a paid watchman and I'm watching the soul that God gave me and hopefully God will respond, or a renter. So even though I see life as that which I am here to use and enjoy, but I have to pay my dues to God who gave it to me, or the highest level, which is the shomer chinam, where it says, I'm here to watch and protect the life that God gave me, and I don't expect anything from it, which is the highest level. I'm just doing it out of a sense of commitment to Hashem. All of these can be had, and all of these are things we can think of, and we can grow in our own connection to God. And again, it's a very fundamental, essential question of how do we view life? How do we view the life that God gave us? Are we watchmen? Are we renters? Are we borrowers? And if we are living a life in which we are just, so to say, borrowing from God without any sense of responsibility in return, well, maybe we should kind of have a shift in mindset and try to move up to a higher level of watchmen of these four watchmen missions. All right, that will conclude. And thank you all for joining. And we'll down higher in a few minutes.
Cool.
Ah.